friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Pup and Away podcast. I am your gal, Steph the Pro Dog Mom. I am a certified dog trainer, canine nutritionist, canine behaviorist, and now officially a certified holistic pet health coach. That's a mouthful. I have more initials behind my name, and I am very excited to share that with you guys. It has been the certification program I've been doing, for roughly about 8-9 months, and I am finally done. And happy to report that. Today, my guest is Roxanne Stone. Roxanne Stone is the Chief Scientific Officer and Key Formulator at Solutions Pet Products, specializing in raw fermented pet nutrition and regenerative farm-to-table sourcing. She has over 30 years of experience in food science. Roxanne earned a bachelor's and a master's degree in nutrition and food science from Utah State University with a minor in chemistry. Before entering pet food, she built an extensive career in human food manufacturing, spanning research, product development, quality systems, regulatory compliance, project management, and commercialization. Her transition into pet food began when her late sister, Jacqueline Hill, invited her to consult for a newly founded family raw pet food company. As Vice President of Research and Development and Procurement, Roxanne helped establish a first-of-its-kind category in the U.S. pet marketing, pioneering fermented raw milks and recipes through rigorous sourcing, formulation, testing, and manufacturing protocols, labeling, and operational oversight. Today, Roxanne continues her mission to uphold the highest standard of pet food at Solutions Pet Products, applying her knowledge of fermentation, fresh fermented raw processing, farm evaluation, whole food nutrition, scientific affairs, and regulatory education. She translates complex technical processes and material into practical understanding for retailers, veterinarians, distributors, and pet parents. After decades spent navigating the intersection of nutrition, agriculture, manufacturing, regulation, ethics, animal welfare, and education, Roxanne has embraced becoming an industry catalyst as central to her mission. That is a lot of lists. This woman does a lot of stuff, has done a lot of stuff. I met her at the Wellness Roundup that was hosted by, I'm going to consider them our friends, my friends over at Fetch and Friskers over in Boerne, Texas. Amazing pet food boutique, pet wellness boutique. They hosted the Wellness Roundup over in Boerne, Texas, and had Roxanne be one of the speakers. I was lucky enough to go see her speak. It was an amazing presentation because she just had science, and it was so much fun to watch. I knew I had to get her onto the podcast to talk to you guys. We only covered about half of what I wanted to cover, and so the information is fun. It is not too scientific, but I would highly recommend paying attention if you're a super geek, taking notes, and possibly even considering this to save this episode to replay again. If you are like me and you listen to podcasts at 2 times, which I think you're crazy because I already talk fast enough, I would not recommend that for this episode because it's, again, full of a lot of really cool information. So I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I had fun talking to Roxanne, and let's go ahead and kick it off. Welcome back, everybody, to yet another episode of the Pup and Away podcast. As you guys heard from the intro, today I am joined by Roxanne Stone. I was introduced to Roxanne during the Wellness Roundup that we had in Boerne, Texas here, was that about a month and a half ago, and I think your presentation, Roxanne, was one of my favorite ones. I had met and seen the other presenters before, so one, I was new to you. I know a lot about solutions, but new to you. And my favorite thing about your presentation was just like how much it geeked out. It absolutely served my little geek heart. So by all means, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Of
it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And secondly, feel free to geek out as much as you want. But I'll always ask the other questions to kind of lay it down into terms for most of my listeners do tend to be just pet parents, not veterinarians or food scientists. So with that, can you give us a little bit of a quick insight as to how you ended up here? Because you did not first start off doing pet stuff.
Correct. Yeah, so I was traditionally educated as a nutritionist and food scientist, it's kind of a dual a little bit more of a dual purpose degree. Food science lends itself more towards obviously food manufacturing, the chemistry of food, unfortunately more like better eating through chemistry. How can we get more preservatives in it? How can we get a longer shelf life? How can we make it less expensive? How can we make it more addicting? All those fun things that, that kind of combine with food. So I started off pretty traditionally with food introduced basically, at your typical supermarket. It was frozen foods, lots of your not so healthy type of bar foods. So mozzarella cheese sticks and jalapeno poppers, and working on research and development for, breadings, different fillings. My background is dairy science, so I actually did my graduate work was on low-fat mozzarella cheese for the pizza industry.
So cool. So
Yeah,
specific.
right. So I worked a lot with starter cultures, fermentation, dairy products, of course. So that I developed a love for that in particular. Developed a love for dairy animals. I think they're just a blessing in general for us. So that's the way I kind of look at them. But yeah, I was about 15 years in the human food industry. Learned a lot. Took a lot away from that, but kind of also being in the not so healthy food sector of manufacturing wasn't very satisfying to me. And I did have a real passion for health and nutrition. My husband actually came down with melanoma cancer at a fairly young age. He was in his early 30s, which also kind of inspired me to do better at health research and nutrition. And I just wasn't, like I said, really satisfied with. My last job was with Jack in the Box Research and Development. It was exciting, but it was, making better burgers or saltier burgers or more, or fries that match more McDonald's fries. Just wasn't inspiring to me
Gold standard.
anymore. Yeah, so I really wanted to get farming. I always was fascinated with farming and traditional farming. And so my sister, my older sister, Jacqueline, at the time was working for Nature's Variety, which was one of the very first truly commercial raw diets that was on the market. They were one of the pioneers, along with a couple of the other ones, Song and so forth. And my sister Jacqueline had a background in veterinary science. So she was a microbiologist, and she wasn't a vet, but she worked for a lot of holistic vets. She became a vet tech, and did that for about 16, 17 years. And she had bred mastiffs for many years, and so she just had a passion for all things, dogs and cats, and working in that industry. And then she really developed a passion for the nutrition side and raw feeding when she was working with a veterinary clinic that started exploring raw diets for dogs. And she was able to witness herself the transformation of health on many levels, and you as a trainer would know too, as far as their behavior, and being a behaviorist yourself, understanding how food impacts that. And so she was able to see that firsthand, and then never looked back. She got into raw feeding, like I said, with Nature's Variety. She would have probably stayed at Nature's Variety, but they sold to a investment firm, and then they started pasteurizing the food. And my sister was a real purist. She was a real purist, and so she said, "No, this isn't for me. I think that's not the right, avenue that I want to see this food go." So she never had any intention of starting her own pet food company, but out of leaving Nature's Variety, then she had many folks in the industry that felt that she should start her own pet food company. So that's how she brought me into the picture. So she called me up in 2009, and I had just left Jack in the Box at that point, maybe been gone almost a year, and I had started my own consulting business. So I was I had Cascadia Food Consulting, and I was just doing some independent work with different farms and manufacturers that needed a food scientist, but maybe they were small, a small company, and just needed some consulting. So I was just doing consulting, and she called me up and said, "How do you feel about pet food?" And I said, "Well, I haven't produced it, I haven't made pet food, but definitely interested." And she said, "Well, you're my little sister, so you're gonna work for me and work cheap, right?" So she hired me as a consultant, and then I joined as a member of the company, and we were the first to put raw goat milk on the market. That was my sister's inspiration, and she just felt that she knew about she fed raw milk to her own children. So she became she was very well educated. One of the organizations that inspired my sister and inspired me today, that she got me started with, was the Weston A. Price organization. Excellent organization for human nutrition, but much of it applies, of course, to our pets as well. Right. And basically, it's just saying, getting back to traditional food preparation methods, of preserving food, whole foods, course fermentation, why that is so important, why that's so beneficial in our food system, and why we should be eating those types of foods regularly, daily. And she changed her diet and her family's diet. She had 3 boys at a very young age, and saw that transformation. And so, of course, she was feeding raw food to her dogs, and just was very experienced in that. So that was one of the first books she gave me was a book from Steve Brown, of course, who was one of the pioneers, and also the veterinarian Dr. Billinghurst, who pioneered the BARF diet, so the biologically appropriate raw feeding. Give your dog a bone.
Yeah, than barf.
Yeah, I know, exactly. And I was hooked then. I was like, this is awesome. This is great. This is absolutely how we should be feeding our canine companions. This makes so much sense. And so she was very passionate, and her passion was contagious. And I definitely picked that up from her. And so since 2009, I haven't looked back. I've gained a lot of satisfaction, and just met so many great people in this industry, with all a common goal of trying to do better for these wonderful canine companions and feline companions that bring us so much joy, are such a big part of our lives. We owe it to them at minimum to feed them a species appropriate diet, give them the best chance at life and longevity as we can. So that alone is just such a nice driver. And I've met so many great people, farmers, nutritionists, behaviorists, trainers, breeders, rescuers, shelter folks, that all have come together for this common goal. And so I feel like it's kind of a big family, and I'm really excited to have made that transition to it.
That's super cool. It sounds like so many stars beautifully aligned. That is such a journey to get you to where you are today. And I'm very thankful for your journey, because I think it's so cool. Like one of my dogs feeds raw or eats raw. The other one, he's 16, so we have transitioned him over to a gently cooked diet. But once I saw the changes, I was like, there's no turning back. And it's an uphill battle, unfortunately, for us to kind of get that education out, because all of us, vets included, love dogs and cats so much, but we obviously have a different background when it comes to the learning. So I'm very appreciative for your background, because it is rooted in science, and you have facts on facts on facts, and that's like one of my favorite graphs, and facts are like, oh my god, this is where I'm at. And one thing that you mentioned that I think is so interesting is, when, even from your food science standpoint, when you were still in the human sector, it wasn't, how to make food. It was how to make it more addicting, how to make it more colorful, how to make it more appealing to the human eye. I think that's kind of what you said, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And obviously, we have a lot of that goes into the pet food industry too, even
Mhm.
in the sense of, some of those kibbles that put all those dyes in it to make you think that that piece of kibble is actually a pea, but like, no, it's
Mhm.
actually just dye.
Mhm.
Uh, I think it's so interesting because so many things in pet care today really stems from human convenience, right?
Right. 100%.
Um, Anything that we do as far as like monthly preventions, it's a human convenience because we don't want to go and, check our dogs every single day
Right.
and have that sort of chore to go through.
Mhm.
It's so interesting that I that's probably where you came from. One of my questions that was going to be leading out of that conversation was, what is something that you were so surprised to see in the pet food sector versus the human sector? And when I put that question down, I was like, oh, she's probably going to say something like, it's crazy how food is so unhealthy in the pet food, but so healthy in the human sector. But I don't think that's going to be your answer at all.
Yeah. What clued you into that? Exactly. Um,
The
yeah,
question still
it's
stands.
it's unfortunate because yes, the way the system is set up, I think the most surprising thing to me when I transitioned over from manufacturing food for human consumption to pets was the regulatory side of so being in the human side of manufacturing, doing things like meat and dairy and cheese. We were regulated, or I would say that that system is regulated both by USDA and FDA. So you kind of deal with both of them, but typically USDA is the plants, the factories and plants that produce most of the human food. Obviously, anything that has to do with the meat side of things is USDA regulated. Okay, and so they have. I didn't realize until I went over to pet food how much USDA and FDA don't like to play together. And really don't. I was so surprised that those two regulatory agencies have very little to do with each other. You would think that they would be, kind of joined at the hip, and that they would be creating regulations and statutes together because it's kind of the industry on a whole, but it's very segregated. And so you think that, oh, well, pet food is meat, right? That's what we all think, right? And it
We
should
hope.
be, as it should, for these carnivore companions that we have. Um, and you would think that USDA would be involved in that because that's where the meat is regulated, but it's not. So pet food and feed, i.e. livestock feed and feed for food animals, are all regulated under FDA. And it's kind of a weird dichotomy because in the human food sector, they do a lot of standards and basically, process controls over time. It's very data oriented. It's very much, standard process controls and understanding what's possible in food, like what, as far as like meat's concerned. They've got it down from doing 20, 30 years now of these data points and understanding, what's the likelihood of salmonella, what's the likelihood of listeria, what's the they have it, the microbiology side of that is so dialed in that I don't understand that where FDA, not that they have access to the same science, of course, access to the same process controls, and understanding that, but they look at it very differently. And so when I came into pet food and they said there's a zero tolerance on pathogens in pet food, I was like, what? Like, that does not make any sense to me at all. And it's not that I'm advocating for pathogens to be in pet food, but particularly in raw pet food, when you're talking about raw meat, the science doesn't add up there. It's an oxymoron to say raw sterile food, or that doesn't add up. That's just not, from all my years of microbiology. So as a food scientist, we get a lot of I like it because it's multifaceted in the sciences. So I had my minors in chemistry, but I had a lot of microbiology, obviously a lot of food safety. So I can speak that language very well, and that was one thing that was like, this doesn't make any sense to me, and there's just not a lot of science to uphold that standard. Like, why would we be doing that? So that was one thing that was weird. The second thing was having to register your product in each individual state. That was so foreign to me. And the label, limitations on the label that they put on you as a pet food manufacturer. So I happen to have just the 2026 AFCO, official publication here. This has all the definitions in, all the regulations, all of that. This doesn't exist in human food. Like, there is FDA rules and regulations, obviously, that we have to abide by. There's things called standards of identity for certain products, like a yogurt or whole milk versus low fat milk. These are standards of identity of how much fat you can have in there for naming conventions, but not like ingredient definitions that are really strict on what you can and cannot put in the food, way more than the human side, and also just way less liberal with, and not that I'm for marketing, not that I'm for deceiving customers or anything, but they're so, you think that the rules that they have in the OP, you would think that these big manufacturers would not be able to put a piece of grilled chicken on the label and then, but they're using literally 4D meat, which stands for dead, diseased, decaying, dying types of meat in there. And so that's the strange thing. It's like there's these strict regulations, but then they allow so much waste to go into food, and it's just really bizarre on what they uphold as a high standard and what they'll fearmonger in the industry, and then what they toss aside and say, oh, we're just going to look the other way on that way. I'll give you an example. So what I was talking about 4D meat, if you look at the regulations of FDA and typically what AFCO follows, which is kind of FDA, and AFCO is a whole nother organization. That's a whole nother explanation of what it does. But basically, there's 21 CFR, it's a code of federal regulations that say that any food or any animal not dead by slaughter. By slaughter means by going through the processing of slaughtering. In other words, it died in the field, it was diseased, whatever happened to it, is not allowed in food. Okay, animals should not be processed into food for human or animal consumption, for both.
Okay.
But the FDA has this compliance policy guide. And Susan Thixton, if you ever follow her on Truth About Pet Food, she explains it beautifully, because Susan has been going to the AFCO meetings about the same time I started going back in 2010. And she understands, she's a consumer advocate, and she tries to explain this to the consumer and what you can expect. And so for non-slaughtered types of animals, so roadkill, and like I said, things that are diseased or dying, they are not supposed to end up in our food chain, but they put them in pet food.
Right.
They allow them in pet food because of a compliance policy guide where 21 CFR, the main rule says, no, this isn't supposed to be in there, but FDA allows this, and they just kind of go like this. They just, that's like how they deal with it. But as a raw food manufacturer who's again, trying to play in the same sandbox and saying, well, my food is safe. Yes, it might not be 100% pathogen free, but I can guarantee you it's safe. It's not going to get anybody sick. It's certainly not going to get a cat or dog sick. Those are and they're like, oh my gosh, it's nuclear waste. Like they treat it like this is the worst thing on the planet, and you're contaminating the planet. And over here, they're putting this dead, diseased, either euthanized animals, that have pentobarbital in them, into dog food, and that's the dichotomy. I'm like, does anybody else, when I came over from the human food, I'm like, does anybody else think this is totally crazy? And Susan and I became friends, sitting together at the AFCO meetings over the years, scratching our heads, going, "This is insane! Like, this is crazy! I can't believe this is how our industry is run."
Yeah, that really is. I a long time ago, and I wish I would have saved the link. I saw a video on YouTube, and it was one of the very first. I think it was an AFCO video, may have been an FDA. I think it was an AFCO. But it was like the president or the CEO at that time from a long time ago, and he just like flat out was like, yeah, we'll pretty much put any kind of meat in here because what else are we supposed to do with it? And that's kind of one of the arguments that I've heard pro those sort of practices is it helps us get rid of this waste in a way to upcycle it and use it, which I'm all for upcycling and I'm all for, saving the planet and things like that. But I also really love my dogs and want to make sure that they're not eating some really gross things. And it's funny how we get like put this, I think people think like we're conspiracy theorists and we're like, there's euthanized animals in dog food. Like, no, there have been studies and there have been foods that have been recalled because we have found that there's pieces of that actually in the food. It's not just a theory, like it is something that has actually happened.
Yeah.
And that's wild. Even something like the styrofoam plastic food packages, right? Because what do we do with the meat when the grocery stores can't sell it? Oh, we'll toss it into a bin, and guess where it goes? It goes to these rendering plants. Or even when we have, these animals that have passed the 4D meats, they have the ear tags on it. Do you think anyone's taking the time to take off those ear tags before those animals go into the pot? No. So we're getting all kinds of these horrible, gross things, and it's not a conspiracy. And you've heard it.
Not. I can back you up on that, Stephanie, for sure. Being on the inside of the industry, and if you've ever gone to a rendering plant, I've only been to one and kind of stayed on the outside of it. It's not a pretty place, and kibble manufacturing too. Again, Susan has some really graphic pictures from Google Earth that you can see outside of a kibble plant where the meat's literally just sitting in a pile at whatever temperature it is, in the parking lot, being ready to be processed into the rendering facility. Obviously they won't even allow you to refrigerate meat that's going into kibble. I know that sounds weird. That sounds really strange, but trust me on this. And Chelsea, who, the owner of Solutions, she's been to the AFCO meetings a lot too as well, and is very schooled on this. And I think I don't know where exactly it's written, but basically it's an underlying rule that if you are processing kibble that is intended to be shelf stable, you are not supposed to be able to procure meat that is refrigerated or frozen.
Okay. I don't even know what to say about that.
Yeah, because it's deemed not for human consumption. It's deemed to be going to pet food, and they that's the way, like, the channels of it. So USDA, where it stops, so we get obviously USDA meat as well as many reputable raw food manufacturers do. We procure the USDA meat, and it's USDA inspected and passed. So when I get in my frozen hearts, frozen livers, kidneys, you'll see the USDA pass sign on there. It is intended for, if humans wanted to eat it, they certainly could, bones and everything, that all goes through USDA inspection, and we pay a premium price for that too. So where the deviation happens is if something does not pass, and so it's going through a USDA facility, and a lot of manufacturers can get away with this little kind of caveat and say, oh, well, we get our meat from a USDA facility. Well, they may that it may actually be true, but it may be the condemned meat, not the passed meat. And so if it's condemned or not fit for human consumption, then it goes to the rendering. And that's where I'm saying they don't technically allow you to refrigerate that. That if it's going to be rendered, they don't bother with refrigeration or that. It goes out the door in a non-refrigerated truck, literally gets dumped into a parking lot, could be 85 degrees. It could be covered in maggots, and they'll say, well, we're gonna render it and we're gonna kill all of that in there. But what they don't realize is, those spoilage bacteria and other things happening leave toxins behind that are not sensitive to heat, that are not degraded necessarily at 450 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. So that's not true. Yes, the living bacteria may be rendered inactive now and dead, but the endotoxins that spill out of them, the exotoxins they make, the aflatoxins and mycotoxins from the molds, we all know those survive harsh heating and pressure. So, these are things that they just look the other way at, unfortunately. And I get it. I'm all for upcycling as well. And there's a lot of food waste in our country. We deal with a lot of food waste, and we do have to better manage that. But making our pets the trash can for that is not the answer.
Ooh, I like the way you put that. We made our pets the trash can for that, for sure. Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
That is wild. I cannot believe. I mean, the first time I heard it, yes, I cannot believe. But the more that I hear it, I'm like, man, I know it, but I still can't believe it sometimes because it is just nuts. I want to switch over to AFCO for a little bit because I think most pet parents, they may not truly know what AFCO is, but they kind of know complete imbalance is what I'm supposed to be looking for when I'm looking at a dog food bag. I don't really know what it means, but that's what I'm told I'm supposed to go towards, and it's something has something to do with AFCO. So AFCO is something that is under the FDA umbrella, correct? But it's not a regulatory entity, correct?
Yeah, it's really bizarre, and somebody who has more legal ease than I do could probably explain it better. It's actually technically it's really not 100% legal if you look at it on paper the way it's done. But nonetheless, sometimes things just because they're so grandfathered in. So AFCO's over 100 years old. AFCO actually started back in the early 1900s, and it was a regulating body that stepped in. They always say, it always starts for the greater good, and it does. And I think at that time there was a lot of manipulation with livestock feed, and people were not being transparent with what they were putting into livestock feed. And they wanted more regulation on that, and there was a lot of good that came out of that, so that these animals, these food animals, were getting fed correctly, and people were not just feeding them garbage. So AFCO doesn't regulate anything. Like it's actually a volunteer kind of, I say that in quotes, a volunteer type of organization where it's typically the state agricultural officials. So each independent state has a Department of Ag. So like Louisiana Department of Ag, or Kentucky Department of Ag, Pennsylvania Department of Ag, and they all have their their offices of where they do the state regulation on the state level. So that's really what compiles the committees that end up volunteering for AFCO.
Okay.
And then you do have the federal drug agents, or federal food and drug, and they do step in. They kind of have this memorandum of understanding, which they had for years and years, and they actually just discontinued that. That's another story too of how that kind of the regulation on that happens. But they do work in tandem, yes. So the FDA is really the only one that can regulate in so much where they can shut down a plant, or they can cite you for label discrepancies or misbranding. AFCO doesn't do any of that. They do write the regulations with the advisement of FDA and those state feed control officials that I was talking to you about. So that's who comes to these meetings, and just about every state in the union's represented. And what they'll do then at the state level is they'll adopt into their state laws the AFCO official publication and rules and regs is what they'll do. So that's how this gets enforced, is at the state level through the departments of ag is how that gets, and that's why you have to register your product as a pet food manufacturer, which does not apply to human food at all, but as a pet food manufacturer or livestock feed manufacturer, you have to register your product that you're selling in each individual state.
Okay.
And some will adopt this entire regulation with all the definitions. Some will adopt part of it. Some don't adopt it at all, and they just take your money and just say, give me give me the check. Okay, you're registered. I don't need to see your label. I don't need to see what you're doing.
Okay.
We just want your money, and you have to police, and at the end of the day, in my opinion, yes, we do need some government regulations to keep everybody on board. But at the end of the day, the manufacturer, meaning in this situation with Solutions, me, I am responsible for getting that food to you and your pet safely and purity, and it's us, it's me and my crew, my production crew, my sourcing. At the end of the day, I'm the responsible one. Yes, FDA can say, you have to follow this and follow that, and they can, come into my plant once every 2 years or once every 3 years and audit, and sure, but at the end of the day, the responsibility is on that manufacturer. They're the ones daily making that pet food, and that's where your trust needs to lie. You can't depend on AFCO and FDA to vet your manufacturer. You have to vet your manufacturer, and I say that with all sincerity, because that is the one, that's who you need to trust, that is making the daily decisions day in and day out and purchasing the food that is going into your dog's bowl. This can say all at once, but and have these definitions. You can put this in, you can't put that in. This is regulated, this isn't. But at the end of the day, it's on me as a manufacturer to make sure it's correct, to make sure the food is right, to do the sourcing correctly, and to do the interventions that I'm confident that food is safe.
That's crazy. I also just think it's crazy that you have to buy this book, right? Like, this information is not available online. Consumers, people who are putting their dollars where the manufacturer, with whoever are choosing to make our dog food, a lot of people don't know the difference between poultry byproduct and chicken byproduct, and
Correct.
where the vagueness gets wrapped up in that. And there's no way to know unless you happen to know that there's a secret book that you have to buy.
Right.
Or maybe you hear podcasts and you hear poultry is a vague word, and that means all kinds of different birds, and unless it says chicken, it may not be chicken.
That is true. That is very true. And like I said, I don't want to beat up AFCO 100%. They do some good things to, I think the intention was there at the beginning, to make sure that contaminated food and material wasn't getting into livestock feed and pet food. And now, like I said, with everything being so corporate run and money in the pocket of these agencies, they put they'll put a priority up here, like, oh my gosh, raw pet food, it's so dangerous, we're not going there. And then, we're putting all of this waste, things like formaldehyde, things like restaurant grease, confectionery waste can go into livestock feed up to 12%. So that's, your big, huge, truck rolling down the road, crashes and Skittles fall out all over the place. that doesn't go in the trash. They shovel that up, and you know what? That goes into livestock feed. That gets reused and upcycled into that, you know,
And
and
then we
that's
eat
not,
that.
and
That's
then
a
we eat that.
problem.
We drink the milk from those cattle, those dairy cattle that are producing that milk. We eat the meat from the feedlot cattle, and it's all recycled into us. Yes, and so you can see why it's a sad state of affairs that our food system is in. It's a big problem to challenge, but I think what people like myself and Chelsea and small food manufacturers that are saying, well, yes, I have to play in this arena, but I can do it better this way. Mm-hmm. And that's what I was trying to explain in the presentation at the Wellness Roundup, that they've written regulations here for nutrient profiles, and there's science behind it. It absolutely, you know, there is, and I don't think that it's not that it's a terrible start, but what has happened over the years and what they've done is, you know, they've taken these regulations and they apply them to the food that typically these pets get, which is, you know, dry kibble. So you'll see on here, you know, AFCO food nutrient profiles, you know, based on dry matter is the one they usually like to use. You can do it as fed, but these are on there. And they are geared toward kibble right. That is, you know, not species appropriate, that's made with a lot of grain, a lot of carbohydrates, you know, very little meat. The meat that's in there is, like you said, the meals, the rendered stuff. So these profiles are based on that. And when you try to apply them to real food, okay, whole food that hasn't been over processed, that doesn't have a lot of toxins in, that's not high carbohydrate, but is whole meats or whole dairy, that's easily absorbable by the body, especially organs, your liver, your kidneys, the organs, the heart, actually help you absorb minerals. They help you absorb these trace nutrients rather than impeding them, where you get a lot of phytic acid from grains that are not sprouted correctly, that are also, you know, mold, you know, have terrible mold on them or have been sitting around. They're going to inhibit, you know, now and soaked in glyphosate and things like that. Well, now those are metal chelators, those are mineral chelators. So now I have to put an extreme, you know, I have to inflate these numbers, these trace element numbers on this nutrient profile to make sure that these animals are actually absorbing, you know, some of this iron from you know, liver that's been rendered and or damaged, or that they can get, you know, because they'll get maybe 10% of that, where in whole foods, like I showed you in the table that I had with the canine milk, they're getting that and then some with the absorb. I mean, that's almost, you know, 90 to 95% absorbable. Mm-hmm. So there's very little that's inhibiting that, and it's really, you know, from here to here it's the difference in the bioavailability of that food, and that's what the AFCO nutrient profiles don't account for. And they tell you in the where these numbers come from is a publication called the NRC, which is the National Research Council, and it's nutrient requirements for dogs and cats. The latest one published was 2006. And that's where AFCO pulls its numbers. And like I said, there is science behind it. They do the work on it. But when you dig into that book, which I have, and I have it here, and you read the science and how they decided how much zinc a dog should have, or how much copper, or how much iron, these are isolated diets that are, you know, that they've titrated a lot of these specific elements or nutrients out of, and they're not utilizing them as a whole food in synergistic in synergy with, you know, digestive enzymes and bacteria that's helping, and all of that in there, that because in order to measure it correctly, using the scientific method, you do have to isolate those things, and you do have to say, okay, this is a direct effect of, this dog gets this from this deficiency. So this is a symptom of, vitamin D deficiency. So we have to isolate that. This is a symptom of that. And I get that, and we understand that, but food doesn't work like that. And that's why nutrition is such a dynamic science, and it'll never be static. It's constantly evolving. We're constantly breaking it apart and learning. And the one thing we have learned over the years is these things don't work in isolation. These nutrients don't work in isolation. They don't work independently in the body. They're quite the opposite. And so when we break it down and say, well, they need this much iron, this much copper, this much calcium, that's how we have to do it, very independently. And when you do that, you're losing a lot of that whole food synergy, that whole biochemistry of all of those things working together to make sure they're utilized correctly in the body at the levels that they need. And that's still evolving. We're still figuring that out. But the best we can do is defer to Mother Nature on that, and defer to what these animals have evolved to eat. And of course, one of the most perfect foods, reproductive foods, right? So your milk is a reproductive food. It is designed by nature to feed an infant. Every mammal starts their life on it. Eggs are a reproductive food. It is made to grow that bird, that chicken, and so that placenta that's in there is designed by Mother Nature. So if you look at those things and you kind of mimic and model after those, in my opinion, as a nutritionist and a scientist, that's the best model to look at. Not necessarily what's been isolated and over the years, especially from synthetic isolates, and that's a whole nother story versus whole food vitamins and the cofactors that go along with them versus a vitamin that's made in the lab and made to mimic that whole food nutrition.
It sounds like we're following these numbers that were put together from fake food. Mm-hmm. Is that okay? So I boiled that down essentially. Okay, yeah. So these numbers, and these are like the minimums of complete imbalance. I think what for an adult dog is like 17% protein, right? 17, 19%.
Yeah, I think it's 17 or 18. Yeah.
And these numbers were put together based off of isolates, not real food. So we're missing all the digestive enzymes, the cofactors. So we have to jack up the amount of some of those things because you're missing all these other things from whole foods. You're not getting it nutrient absorbed, and therefore we need more of it. But these numbers are also like percentages for dogs to survive on, not necessarily to thrive on, right? Can you speak to anything about how like the study in which the methodology in which these numbers were made? From what I heard or what I've read about it or researched about it, it was like a small feeding trial, and they just found out this is the number in which not many dogs died, and we shall go with that number.
Yeah, and so AFCO does allow you, if you so as a manufacturer, you have a couple options, right? So the first option is, abide by these numbers. We mapped out the nutrient profiles, hit all of these numbers, and you can write complete and balanced on your label, and you're good to go, and you're good. Second version is, okay, if you're not meeting these numbers, then do a feeding trial. Okay,
which is also expensive. I would assume.
I'm sorry.
Which I would assume is also expensive.
Very expensive. So the minimum is $25,000 for the bare minimum feeding trial. Okay, and this is and Jackie and I had this discussion a lot because we actually did do a feeding trial, not with confined animals. So where we draw the line, so this is where it gets hard. So they have these centers where you'll see a lot of them rescuers and stuff. You'll see beagles, right? Because they have these beagles. That's what they use. So beagles apparently are easy to breed. They're a medium-sized dog. They are the lab rat, unfortunately, for the pet food industry.
Yeah.
Okay. And they have these breeding colonies that they've had for probably close to a century now. These confined animals in these institutions, these research institutions. So my sister, when she was working for Nature's Variety, I remember she said she was mortified because Nature's Variety was doing a feeding trial with one of these beagle institutions, and she, for some reason, somebody couldn't drop off the food, so she had to drop off the food. And she said you literally pull up into this gated, you know, barred off, kind of wired off institution. Yeah, like a guard lets you in. She said she couldn't even go into the facility. There was like a door like you do at the bank for deposits, and she had to put the food into this door. She could not go in. She didn't see anybody. She couldn't see the dogs. She just like had to drop off the food, and she said it was horrifying how secretive it was, and this particular place. And so a lot of raw pet food manufacturers that get into this because of their love for animals, because they want to see them, really don't want to support that. And so so if you're not following, if your food doesn't fit into the AAFCO nutrient profiles because it is a whole food and it, you know, might not be hitting some of those specific trace elements, then they'll say do a feeding trial. And then the feeding trial, you have to go to one of these institutions that have these beagles that are kept in captivity, pay $25,000 minimum to have your food go through. And it's only 26 weeks. That's the thing. It's half a year. So 26 weeks, and it's 8 dogs, and 2 can drop out. And the minimum is basically, that there's a couple markers that they measure, blood markers. They take the weights of the dogs, and if the dogs don't lose too much weight and they don't die by the end of the trial, you get a rubber stamp. Well, you're good to go. And now, so you can see where the options lie. You know, you're like, well, there might be a few of the nutrients that, again, are I think artificially elevated. Zinc and copper are 2 of them that some raw manufacturers aren't meeting, and I don't want to put synthetics in there to meet it because that could actually be dangerous to the dog. And now, so on the flip side, so then you can't say, well, you really technically can't say complete and balanced. Well, then do a feeding trial, but I don't want to pay. I don't either have 25,000 because I'm a small food manufacturer. That's a lot to fork out. And I don't want to support these confined feeding operations with these beagles.
Oh, that's wild.
So you can see where the options get pretty thin there, and there's not a lot. So it's either educate people and explain, you know, why you can only say this on your label, even though you're confident that the food is doing what it should be and is offering all of the nutrients that this dog needs. It's tough. It's a tough situation because it's the arena we're forced to play in, but it does not. I don't think it adequately assesses our type of food.
Right. The wildest thing that I walked away from the wellness roundup was from you, and I came home and I think I immediately made a social media post about it, but it was how a bitch's milk, canine milk, is not considered complete and balanced. Can you go through that a little bit more and like what exactly about it doesn't make it complete and balanced, and also how backwards that is? Like ass backwards, I guess. You told me literally I'm like in the first row and my jaw's on the floor and I'm just staring up at you like, what do you mean?
So we have the privilege of working with a lot of farms and farmers on the East Coast, in Pennsylvania in particular, and we have a few that are doing some breeding, and they do it very responsibly. They're very, very good at what they do, and we ask them to collect some of their milk. And there's not a lot of publications. I think there's 3 total, and there was one from the Middle East that we found, and the numbers were kind of strange on that one. I remember Chelsea and I trying to find the author for this paper because we wanted to confirm some of the mineral levels that they were finding in canine milk. But as far as what's published out there, there's very, very minimal amount published. The one of them was on beagles back in the 50s that they took some canine milk from beagles and did macronutrient and a few minerals on it. Lisa Freeman authored one, if you know who she is, from the UC Davis group that, again, was minimal. It was like 5 different breeds, maybe 15 dogs. It wasn't that many. And so we had very limited information to start with on canine milk. So we wanted to gather some more. So we did 3 separate laboratory trials, having this farmer collect some milk for us. It took a while because, like I said, we didn't want to take milk away from any of the pups, and we didn't want to stress mom too much and stuff. So it took a while to build it up, but we got enough over time. And yeah, when you break down the nutrients, so we sent it out for, of course, the macronutrients, your protein, your fat, your carbs, your moisture, and then some trace minerals, and the ones that are in particularly usually in question on the raw side of things where we're not hitting those at that elevated AFCO level. So iron and zinc, copper, a couple of those. And we sent those out for testing, and of course, and when I did the table, on the slide, I could show you that it was not meeting the AFCO nutrient profiles for growth and reproduction. Some of the adult maintenance might have met it, but for what they consider growth and reproduction for a puppy, which Mother Nature has the perfect food for a puppy, right? Bitch's milk, and that's what you would expect, and that's what a puppy for millennial now has grown on, right? Would not meet the AFCO minimum nutrient profiles to feed a puppy.
And again, that's because the profile is based off of isolates, and we need so many more of that in just amount.
Mm-hmm. Or it's based off of food that is not species appropriate.
Okay,
so high carbohydrate kibble diet, which is what these puppies start their life on, has a lot of these anti-nutrients in there that bind metals. Okay, so not only is it soaked in glyphosate, if you're not buying organic, it has a lot of carbohydrate material in there that has, so grains, rice, grains, things like that have a lot of phytic acid. If you're not sprouting your grains to reduce that phytic acid, then it will bind up your minerals and keep them from being absorbed. Okay,
gotcha.
Particularly zinc and copper and iron and those types of things. And so that's why they elevate those so that you put more in there. And they're also synthetic ones that you're putting in there. So they're going to act differently than whole food nutrition vitamins are, Yes, you can take ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C, in a tablet form, and that will keep you from getting scurvy, right? The vitamin C deficiency. But ultimately, you're going to get the full spectrum of vitamin C from eating that orange, eating that citrus, that you're not going to get there. And that's the same thing with these synthetics. Your body will recognize them enough to keep you from severe deficiencies, but they're not utilizing them at the maximum benefit that they can. And so that's what they account for when they're doing that. So I said there's science behind it, and they realize that phytic acid's getting in the way, or trypsin inhibitors are getting in the way. And so rather than process the food correctly by either sprouting those seeds and using them more efficiently, or fermenting them and getting the fermentation to break it down for you, they don't do that. That would be too expensive and too much processing. So they just artificially inflate those numbers, so you put more synthetics in there and put your powdered vitamins and minerals from China, and you're covered.
And that's the standard, y'all. That's what everyone aims for. My goodness. You touched on fermentation, and that was something that was on my list. I don't think we have enough time today to dive into that, because that deserves its whole hour, I'm sure. But Roxanne, before I let you go, because I think we've already thoroughly discussed it, everyone, with this conversation. And I mean, everyone should be, asking questions and mad and upset and be following people like Roxanne and Susan Thixton, because y'all are the ones going up to bat with us at these AFCO meetings and being the voice for us. So with that being said, how can we support you guys, Solutions, Susan? Like, what are the best ways if someone's listening to this and they're like, oh my God, I can't freaking believe this. What can I do to help?
I'm glad you brought that up, because in addition to Susan's great newsletter, which is truthaboutpetfood.com, we actually employed a very dear friend and veterinarian, Dr. Kathy Alanovi, to represent us, meaning small food pet manufacturers. So mostly raw pet food manufacturers. Some that are in the organization are doing gently cooked, and so it's called Next Generation Pet Food Manufacturers Association. That's a lot to say, but if you go to NGPMFA, did I say that right? .org, Next Generation Pet Food Manufacturers Association, the acronym .org, you will find a lot of information on there. So I sit on the steering committee. Dr. Kathy Alanovi is our fearless leader, and I guess our board advocate, or I can't think of the name, chairman of the board, I guess she would be, for our organization. And she sits on a lot of committees for AFCO to help represent us. So awesome. One of the things that, when Susan and I first started going to the AFCO meetings, we would sit there and watch. The Pet Food Institute is the organization that represents the big guys. So your big kibble manufacturers are all under Pet Food Institute. And
gotcha.
You go to these AFCO meetings and there's 300 people in this large ballroom, and then there's a big table up front with the committee members. And you see the PFI people, the Pet Food Institute, who are representatives from M&M Mars and, Purina and Hill Science Diet, sitting there, and they're whispering next to the FDA person that's sitting next to them, and they have their direct influence there with these FDA and feed control officials, right? And Susan and I are sitting there going, we don't have anybody advocating for us, so Susan's there for the consumer, and God bless her that she is, and she's there advocating for the consumer. I'm there trying to defend raw food manufacturing and the small food manufacturers, and why we want to use whole foods and not synthetics. And so God bless her, Dr. Kathy, she stepped in and was like, I'll do it. And she started the ngpmfa.org organization, Next Gen Pet Food. And awesome. So we've been, since 2016, and end of 2016, we started the organization. So people can go to that website. We also just started a new website called petinfoexchange.org, where we explain a lot of what I just spoke about today on the regulatory side of things, like what the limitations are for pet food manufacturers, what the limitations are specifically for raw and whole food pet food manufacturers that are doing fresh foods, that are either doing raw or gently cooked, and why, these hurdles that we have to jump through, and we try to be transparent with the consumer and with the retailers, but the feed control officials often get in between and say, that's a drug claim. You can't say that you're putting turmeric in the food for an anti-inflammatory. You can't say you're using, dandelion root for, a natural diuretic for a kidney support disease. You can't say that. And so these are the types of things. And so that petinfoexchange.org will explain a lot of that. So please look into that. So Next Generation Pet Food Manufacturers Association and petinfoexchange.org.
Very cool. I will be linking those to the show notes and definitely be looking through that myself, because that's very interesting. Wow, I am fired up. That just the image of these Pet Food Insider or whatever, just like talking to the that image right there just really makes me so mad. I can't believe it.
You should attend an AFCO meeting if you can at some point in your career. It's eye-opening. It does. They do. For a while, they were charging consumers, and this is where Susan's influence really has paid off because of her advocacy for consumers. for a while, it was the same cost that all of us paid, which it was 500. It just went up to 700, but it was $500 for industry members to attend, or we're not members, I guess, to go. The only ones who can be members are from the FDA and the state control officials. And then consumers really they'd have to pay the 500 too. Well, they made a consumer price of $350, so a consumer now can go in and listen. You can also listen for free online.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Did open that, thanks to Susan. Now you can go on as a consumer, and you can listen to the meetings online.
I think that's the way I would have to go, because I would need like a pillow or something to scream into and to hit probably.
Yeah.
I don't think I could sit in this
Yeah.
room of people and like
Oh,
have
yeah.
control.
It's tough. It's really hard to do,
I
and
bet.
it's yeah. And so, but that's the arena that we're forced to kind of be in. So we have to figure it out, and we have
Yeah.
to figure out how we can operate in it, and still have this commercially available raw food available for these pets.
Absolutely. Well, Roxanne, first, thank you for your time today. Second, thank you for going up to bat for us, fighting the good old fight. And third, thank you for formulating such a beautiful food like Solutions, which we didn't even have a chance to talk about. And we'll have to get you back on to talk about fermentation and restorative diets and things like that. But I definitely will be linking Solutions into the show notes as well. So then that way, listeners, if you're like, okay, that was horrible, now what do I do? You can go look into Solutions. And for those of you in San Antonio, we are hoping to get them on our shelves that pop up and away here pretty soon. I'm just having to figure out the wholesale distribution process of you guys, but I'm already in connection with somebody. They're just, whoever is our distributor is a little slow down here on our side of the country.
Yeah, we got to work on that. Let me know if you need help.
Okay, sounds good. Well, listeners, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope we didn't scare you too much. I hope your blood pressure can come down after listening to today's episode, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Thank you. All right. Now, that might be the end of the episode, but the fun doesn't have to stop here. Follow us on social media. I'd love to connect with you. We have quite a few social media platforms. For nutrition and holistic pet care tips, follow me on TikTok and Instagram at Steph the Pro Dog Mom. You can find fun training tips on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Pup Pup and Away SA. If you're in San Antonio and you want to bring your dog to us for boarding, training, socialization, and nutrition, come find us. But if you're not in San Antonio, we do training and nutrition sessions virtually. Yes, they can be just as effective, I promise. Please rate, review, and subscribe to my podcast on whatever platform you listen on. And please, please, please share with a friend. The positive reinforcement of knowing people actually listen to this and find it valuable helps motivate me to keep on recording. We'll see you guys at the next episode.